Oh, cool. Hey,
Hey.
how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So this will just be like a quick 20-minute thing. There's two main things I just want to touch base around.
Yeah.
Three actually, and then anything else you want to add to the agenda, and then we can kind of figure out which ones we want to tackle first because we probably won't be able to hit them all today. Okay. So, first is I was able to get into the classroom on Monday and just like reflecting on that and everything through the use of the IPG tool. That's one thing I'd like to touch upon. I wanted to just clear up the logistics for tomorrow
Okay.
to make sure that everyone's good to go. If there's any like concerns or stressful things like that. And then the third thing is I wanted to kind of pick your brain about. I still really like. I need to clear tomorrow for the three of us to meet, you, me, and Miss Sigler. But I still
Okay.
think it's really meaningful. Because I still think you've done a ton to support her, and now it's like we need her to understand like what real learning looks like. Because I think a lot of the structures and stuff are there, but just like what does deep constructivist learning look like? That's not just like plugging into a calculator so we can get the answer type of thing. Like so, like when I was reviewing your lesson plans, one of the questions was we don't care what the answer is, we just want you to set it up. That was one of the do nows. Don't worry about what the answer is, set it up, right? So like to me that's a much different question or thought process than plugging into the calculator so you get the right. So I think like how we have that conversation in a meaningful way with Miss Sigler so it's abundant throughout the classroom.
Yeah.
And then two quick things I just wanted to share that are kind of non sequitur but really cute. Aaliyah said third period is like her favorite place in the world and she feels really safe and learns a lot in there.
Yes.
And then I was talking to Jocelyn
Awesome.
and I was like, how her class is going. She's having some issues elsewhere. She's like, I really like math. And I was like, that's awesome. And she's like, and this is just something to ruminate on. It's like, I would love to spend more time with Ms. Osborne because it always seems like she's going, because it seems like because she's always on point. And
Aww.
I was just like, that's so cute that you want more time with Miss Osborne.
Oh.
So.
She means like on point as far as like helping her with work? Or?
So she means basically that she loves that you check in with her and do the work stuff, but because of the nature of the ICT classroom and the setup we have, and she doesn't have an IEP, that she doesn't feel like she's...
Oh, she's always on point. Oh, okay.
Which I think is interesting and something that we should bring up with Chloe, because now that we have this structure in place where you're conferring with different kids, I think T3 might be nice to like mix it up a little bit, like still get the supports for our neediest kids, because you can do that in a way that a lot of people can't, but also like it would be fun for you to work with a Jocelyn a little bit more.
Definitely. Oh,
cool. So I thought those were two really cute things that people said about you this week, so I was going to share.
Thank you.
All right, back to, is there anything else you want to add to the agenda?
No, I think just at the end, like what we're looking for more in the lesson plan itself, because it's still a bit of a struggle to get to the point of having everything in there, but when we have it all there, I've been adding a lot of like, if students don't understand this, what happens the next time? So we can look at that, or just like what you want to look for in the future.
Okay, so my suggestion would be, let's take a look at the IPG tool and the response to the lesson I saw, and then filter that into what I'm looking for in lesson plans, because I think the two of them are very much alike. How's that sound?
Good. Sounds good.
So I would ask, just pull up the feedback that I sent.
Okay.
Well, yeah, the IPG tool itself, but also the feedback that I sent via email.
Sure.
And did you get a chance to read through it?
Yep.
Okay. So what were your initial impressions, first of the lesson and then of the feedback? And take a second.
So my initial...
So like before you got the feedback, what'd you think? How do you think the lesson went?
So I think my favorite part of the lesson was the independent practice, because that's when I got to see the students, working on problems that they struggled with in the past. It was a tricky lesson because I think test review is always pretty tricky, especially on a short period. And I don't want to make excuses, but it was very unique from what a typical I do, you do, we do, you do,
of course,
example of a lesson would be. And so we wanted to make sure that every class had a little bit of review, because to be honest, our eighth period had some of the review before, since they were the only class getting taught by us.
Right.
The last 3 days before that.
Oh, because you had them in the
Yeah.
afternoon, right? Copy.
So we wanted to make sure everyone was just on the same page.
Sure.
So we kind of short-handed it and made it so that we obviously can't go through the whole exam in a 45-minute period, but we went through as much as we could, and we did it strategically as far as focusing on multiple choice or the short answers. In hindsight, I would have just focused on the short answers and not multiple choice.
Why would have you made that choice?
Because I think a lot of them had the same themes in them as far as they were all functions and they were all questions on like either graphing or putting together functions. So we could have brought the mini lesson as far as teaching them how to set up functions and graph them or interpret them. And rather than going on over all these different everything.
So I'm just gonna do my annoying thing where I act just as a mirror. So if you just gave them short answer questions, what would be the drawback in that? Because I think there was a lot of value in what you did. What would be the drawback in saying just do short answer questions?
Because in the past I've seen that a lot of students will completely freeze when they come to short answers and multiple choice. They'll at least do something and work towards something. We had an issue in the past years where students would just leave things blank, and for the most part we taught these students to be confident in actually trying it, but that's where they lose a lot of points if you think about as far as the points on the test. I do like that we did. I chose the 4 questions and then we went over those 4 first. So maybe keep that and then bring it back to function lesson and then
And I think like one thing I always admire about your classroom is like this idea of choice is something that like I just think I can't express enough how important it is for kids to have choice. So I think I actually really enjoyed that they had the option of doing the 2 multiple or the 1 extended. I think there's definitely benefit of pushing them towards the short, but then thinking through like, so everyone's doing short answers, but maybe I still provide choice with like maybe how they present their findings or whatever it may be, right? So it's like not all of them are doing the same thing.
Right.
Does that make some sort of sense?
Yeah, that does.
Cool.
Okay.
So I think my feedback aligns very much with what you said. My first thing that, like I just said, I just love that they were given options to work on things that they felt they needed more work on, right? So like very frequently, just because of my background, I go to students who struggle the most when I observe, but I had an opportunity to work with Odanya.
Right.
And it was really, really powerful to watch her figure out something that she like half knew and then wanted more support with, right?
Yeah,
So that was, it was really, really nice to see. And that wouldn't have happened if everyone had to do the same problem, because it wouldn't have pushed her. Right. So like we think of differentiation to support kids who struggle, but she needs differentiation in a different way, and you provided that. So that was really awesome. The work that you've done with Aaron and the work that you and Chloe have done, and some with me, like about who's doing which portion of the lesson, who's responsible for the logistical things, is just very clear and it's seamless. So no time is lost with like, oh, am I doing this or are you doing that? So I think that's like definitely something that you and I have talked a lot about. So it's really nice to see that in the classroom. The main thing, like as far as the pedagogy, you didn't do the work for the kids. Like they were given a long period of time to work on grade level problems and figure it out either by themselves with a partner or the support of an adult.
Right.
That's what we want, right? We don't want kids spoon-fed answers.
Right.
We want to create like productive disequilibrium or productive struggle, constructivism, whatever we want to call it, but that place where they're, you know, really pushing themselves to figure out grade level stuff. So those are my huge shout outs to you.
And I think, sorry, just to add with that, like that's something that I've had to work on a lot, because even with the strongest co-teachers that I've had, it's always been stand in front of the room and tell them the answer and why, like the whole period. So, and it was more doable because I was with strong co-teachers who could manage the class and do that, and we would just go back and forth. But in hindsight, I'm like, how did that like help them?
Sure.
So I've had to think about that a lot. Yeah.
And I think I don't want to digress too much into this, but if you think about like what your possible role could be next year as a mentor, I would push you to think about why teachers do that. And you don't need to answer it now, but like why are teachers afraid, or I don't want to say afraid, but why is it like stand in front and kind of give the answer, whereas like what you're doing is the exact opposite. You're letting the kids build out their own answers and pushing them, right? So like I think it's interesting to think about why teachers do the things they do. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that you note that that was difficult, and it's very clear to me that you have been working on it. So
Thanks.
shout out to that.
Thank you.
My grows align with the next steps. One of them is not really a grow that's like specific to you. I think it's something school wide that now that we have a lot of structures in place, we're going to push towards, and that's just like very clearly denoting what the Common Core standard is. I know you put it on your lesson plans.
Yeah.
But I think just making it visible for kids, right?
Oh,
Because
okay.
I think the reason that's important is a lot of the rubric that New Visions uses is like, how does what we're doing today tie into what we did yesterday? And if they see that like 5 aims or learning objectives factor into one standard, it will kind of like give them that frame.
Okay.
Does that make some sort of sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
I guess I'd ask like maybe we could hash out at some point like how visible that is to the kids. Like, do we put it on the handout, on the board, or
And I think
yeah.
I'll tell you how I did it in my classroom, but I would also say it's really up to you. You know your kids better than I do, and you know yourself better than I do. But what I would do is, on those big white chart papers, I would put the standard, and then I would like make a tree diagram of the learning objectives that filtered into the standard.
Okay.
So I wasn't writing it each day, right? Like maybe for the week or whatever. And then I think one thing that I did, which I really loved, was I like broke down the language of the standard for the kids, right? Like giving them some context for why we're doing the math we're doing.
Right.
We're not just like, it's not like Miss Osborne and Miss Sigler just woke up today and said, we're gonna work on functions, right?
Yeah.
Cool. And then the last thing is really just like a logistical thing. The answer sheet, like I think the lesson may have went a little smoother if the answer sheet was printed, and I think I know why it wasn't, and we can just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But just to circle back to the first thing you said, completely understand it was the first day after finals. Completely understand that review lessons are really tough. Just this might be my own selfishness. I'm just trying to very clearly carve out that time on Mondays for classroom visits, because like I shared with you, like my professional goal is to be more present in the classroom.
Yeah.
So I just wanted
Okay.
to like start to put myself into that
That's good
routine.
to know. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool.
Questions?
No, I mean, not really. I'm wondering if you're looking at, I'm wondering if you're looking at the lesson plan as you're typing this stuff. So if you had any feedback as far as like connecting it to that.
So, the answer is yes and no, right? I set like a day a week to go through weekly lesson plans. So ideally, I write it out and then it aligns to that. But to be perfectly honest with this, I didn't, because I wasn't really pressing people to have their Monday lesson plans in, because like you said, it was the first day after finals and stuff like that. But as far as how this stuff aligns to the lesson planning itself, I think the clearest link is the DOK levels of questioning. And it's not that the questions you asked them to solve in the independent practice were low level. It was more that as Miss Sigler, and this is a conversation that I think the three of us will have, but it was very much like how we do it, not why we do it,
Right.
or different ways we could do it. So like we can kind of get that authentic dialogue about math. And I think part of it is the culture of charter schools, part of it's the culture that's been created for better or worse here, but Regents is kind of like at the forefront of everyone's mind. And I think you and I have had this conversation, and I would always argue that like them understanding math will always be the thing that helps them on the Regents much
Right.
more than them being able to plug into a calculator. Like they need to understand why they're doing it rather than simply how.
Exactly.
And I think a huge part of that is just like embracing the awkwardness of the silence. Right? If you pose a hard question and it takes kids a while to get to it, like that's okay. You know? Maybe that wouldn't have been okay in that third period class in September when it was like World War III, but like now that it's like a very calm,
Yeah.
intellectually safe space, like let them grapple with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think what's always tricky about these is I like to have the the individual meetings with you, but then I also am very aware that this isn't just incumbent upon you. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is like classroom stuff that everyone needs to hear, but I think it's also just good food for thought for anyone
Right.
in the classroom. As far as your lesson plans go, they were perfect for Wednesday and Tuesday of this week. So what
Those
you
are the
put
ones I
in,
made.
right? Okay. So I think like coming back to it is the accountability, but it's like your do nows are prompts that aren't closed-ended questions that get kids to think.
Right.
That's a check for understanding, right? So now we know where the class is starting. It very clearly states that in the lesson plan, and then it states how that check for understanding filters into the mini lesson. I also noted that even though it seems like the simplest thing, the way you're outlining the days of the unit on the top,
Oh,
I think is really helpful for anyone who's looking at the plan, namely me, or anyone who's being part of the development of the unit. Like, so for you and Chloe, just like the simple, I think today was quadratic linear or something like that. So ensuring that everyone's on the same page is really, really helpful. I saw that you did the groupings, very responsive. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think the only other thing I would push you to do is the questioning aspect is like, so your Tom Brady question,
yeah.
I loved, right? That would be a DOK3 question, pushing them into the higher order thinking. One thing that I might push you guys to do is think about what questions you can ask during the like mini lesson or the guided practice that aren't necessarily like math questions that they answer. I don't know if that makes some sort of sense, but like,
yeah.
why do I need to know how to solve a quadratic equation using a linear model or whatever it may
Right.
be? How can that help me in college? How can that help me in my profession? What would happen to this quadratic formula if I took out the variable, right? Like a substitution question or whatever it may be. And these aren't, again, like solvable right answer questions.
Yeah.
It's more just like thinking and contextualizing the work itself.
Right.
Does that make some sort
Yeah,
of sense?
definitely.
And then again, I think to circle back to the original feedback, like allowing those questions to live in the classroom and go from student to student. So when I was observing Chloe in the front of the room, it was like a ping pong match. It was like teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, student. And the conversation was good, but now I think the next step is like teacher, student, 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 teacher, right? Like trying to put the onus onto them as much as possible. That's a nasty word. Trying to put the cognitive lift onto them as much as possible. Yeah, I think the plans translate very clearly into what I see in the classroom. And I don't mean that like, yes, on the day-to-day, but mainly like the culture of the classroom is very clear and that comes alive from the paper into the classroom.
Cool.
Does that kind of hit upon your lesson planning questions?
Yeah, thank you. Like you said, like a lot of it, I think, is discussions between all three of us too, and I think that'll help too. Like when we're going into, I was just excited to do that exit ticket, but like when we're going into the sections that we're actually doing, I'll work more with her on like questioning, and we'll do that more
Yes.
as far as
Right,
yeah.
and I greatly appreciate that, but I also, I mean, you and I, one of our personal / professional goals was like, what you're doing for, she's lucky to have you as a co-teacher, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to do two jobs, right? So I think what you're doing is very clear, right? And it's very transparent for me when I go in, or even into the classroom, who was responsible for what. So I think, yes, you can support her, but at the end of the day, we all need to be accountable for what we're doing. So I don't want you to feel at all like this is reflecting upon you or anything. Cool. So I just want like, for next steps, what would be 2 tangible next steps that I can look for when I come into the classroom next week?
Into the classroom.
Or on the lesson plan, whatever you
okay.
prefer.
So I think we'll do one lesson plan, one classroom. So in the lesson plan, there'll be, let's say, at least 3 anticipatory questions.
Cool.
Within the teacher roles
Mm-hmm.
in the mini lesson / guided practice.
Cool.
That will help add more discussion,
Mhm.
and it will be created between me and Chloe
Mhm.
this time, so that we know like that this is the kind of conversation we want to have
Mhm.
in the class. In the classroom, we'll see. We'll have more when we do partner work, or because most of the time it is like
Mhm.
if it's a poster or something
Mhm.
like that. We'll have specific words that we'll want them to use, I guess, or discussion type thing. I'm trying to think of like how we can see conversation happening more
Interesting. Okay.
with the math.
Alright. So I think like a very, and feel free to wordsmith me or push back against it, but I'll make it a point to see the mini lesson and / the guided practice. And I think a simple goal would be to have like maybe 3 kids speak back and forth to each other without teacher interjection.
Right. Okay.
Right, like start small, simple, tangible, and if it's 1 or 2, then we can take it from there. But just like a very objective data point,
Yes.
and it directly relates to the questions that you'd be posing in the lesson plan. So it's perfect.
Cool. All right.
How's that feel?
Great. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. For tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
how you feel? Good. Everything's pretty clear.
Yeah, I went to that info. thing
Yeah, I
yesterday.
just wanted to
Yeah.
circle back. Yeah.
You did say that you still want to have the meeting with me and Chloe tomorrow?
No, I'm gonna
Oh,
clear my
okay.
calendar for that.
Oh, okay.
I
in
need
the
to
future.
clear.
Future.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
I need to clear my my. I need to clear my calendar for Thursday in general.
Oh, okay.
But I do want those meetings to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it doesn't need to be a weekly basis, but I think for our professional relationship to grow, it needs to. I think like it needs to be the 3 of us,
Mm-hmm.
really, because like I think we can always continue to push each other and pick each other's brains, but in order for the classroom to meet the level that we're talking at, it needs to be all 3 of us.
Right. Okay.
So I don't know if that means I just switch our check-ins formally into weekly meetings with her, so you don't feel overburdened. I still like to have the one-on-one check-ins with you because it's just I don't know, fun for me. But we can think about that.
Okay.
for the
Yeah.
next steps. I redid my whole calendar for T3 to try and like give people space that I know
Yeah.
can handle it, but also I don't want to just drop.
No,
the
I
ball.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
It's definitely doable. Like if you want to change to another time, because I can do that with her too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll be honest. It's been much more feasible to take on
curriculums.
this work now that I'm not doing it. So I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I just want what was the major takeaway from this year as far as going into next year? That we shouldn't teach across 3 curriculums. We shouldn't have 2 co-teachers.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that life's a little
Yeah.
easier, a little bit better. And you fell in love with the 9th graders.
I did. Yeah.
That's amazing. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm glad that switch worked.
Yeah.
And then John's good and Aaliyah's good.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. All right.
Yeah. So tomorrow looks good. I guess from my understanding though, I'm doing all the different sessions after first period,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
I mean, that's what I would like, but that doesn't mean it needs to be what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I think you also need personal time. So like, I don't know if it's you teach first and whatever. I defer to
Okay.
your thinking.
Well, it's fine. I'm meeting with Marissa.
Marissa,
Sorry.
who's awesome, by the way.
Great. Yeah. So she's gonna meet me 7th period, and that's just for a little bit, and then I'll have all that prep. So it's fine.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. And then the other thing we said was, what does deep learning look like? But that's something we talked about kind of.
Yeah. Well, so to me, deep learning, if you get the kids talking, that's the entry point to deep learning.
Right.
So I think like this is a first tangible step towards that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Awesome.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.